In our last tutorial, we took a look at working with the basic drawing tool, and as you can see, we worked with the rectangle and the oval shape tool, and we created a couple of shapes here. Now I'm going to show you what we can do with this tool, the selection tool. It's the black arrow tool. There are actually a number of selection tools inside of Flash, and as you can see, they are separated by this line in your toolbox. There are drawing tools separated by this line, some erasers and color picking and stuff like that, and some hand movement tools as well as a zoom tool that we have here. But what we're looking at right now is this first and foremost basic selection tool. And as you can see, I've got the black selection tool. Now, the one nice thing about all Adobe products when you are working with a selection tool, there is in the vast majority of them a properties window. And we saw the properties window when we were taking a look at the interface earlier. And as you can see, if I open it up a little bit more, when we select any one of these given shapes, it'll give us information about them inside the property window. I'm just going to expand that property window so we can see what we're talking about here. And I'll just press spacebar and move my stage over just a little bit. And you can see that when we do in fact select one of these things, it gives us information about that thing inside of our property window. So here we have a shape, and it's giving us the X and Y location, the width and the height of that shape. It's giving us, as you can see here, fill is red, but there's no stroke. And why is that? Because when you single click on any given shape, it's only going to select the stroke. So if I were to move this, as you can see, it's only going to select the fill. If I move it, I've left the stroke behind. So if I press Control Z to undo that, that'll move that back into position. One way to get around that is to, number one, first let's deselect by just clicking on the stage, anywhere on the stage. And you'll notice when you click on anything inside of Flash, and in this case I'm clicking on the stage, what we see is information about the stage. It tells us it's got a frame per second rate of 24. That'll be explained later on. It also tells us that we have the width and the height of the stage being 550 by 400. That's the default. So in order to get around this, when we are selecting our objects, we can double click those objects, and now that allows us to select both the fill and the stroke, and I can move that around successfully, whether I do that with any kind of shape, being an oval, circle, or a square. Double click selects both the fill and the shape. Now you might remember that the last time that we had selected or that we had created our circle, we created the last one as what we called an object drawing. So when I select this, just single clicking on it, you'll see in the properties window it says this is not a shape anymore. This is actually an object drawing. And as I explained to you before, when you have an object drawing, you have a grouped shape, a grouped item. Now why is that important? Well, let's come back to that in a little bit later, but let's also first explain what's happening with these basic shapes here. If I were to double click this shape and overlap it on top of one of the other ones, well, let's see what happens when I deselect first and foremost, and then if I double click that shape again and move it over, let's see what happened. Well, what you can notice is that when objects are just simple shape objects and you're overlapping them and they exist on the same layer, when you come back to them and select them, you may in fact recognize here that we have taken a bite out of our piece. Now that could be interesting. I mean, you could use that to your advantage. For example, I could come here to the corner and I could deselect, and then if I double click it again and select it, I've taken a nice perfect circle bite out of that square. It's actually, something that could be advantageous to you. And if you're wondering about the stroke and continuing that stroke, well, there are other tools that allow us to do that. For example, over here we have the paint bucket tool, which is used to fill in colors. But if I press down on it, you'll see that there's an ink bottle tool, and the ink bottle tool allows me to continue that stroke. So now I've got a perfectly stroked item. If I were to switch back to the selection tool, notice that when you hold your mouse over it, it gives you a letter shortcut. You could try it. It's called V on your keyboard shortcut, and that accesses that tool. If I double click this, I could also change information like the fill and the stroke color. I could also change the stroke size. As you can see here, I can, increase that, slide it. I could give a numeric value. Let's say I'll give it a value of 4, just like that. And you'll see that this has a thicker stroke than some of the other objects that we have there. We're going to come back to that stroke in just a second. But let's take a look again at the object drawing. Well, the main difference is when you place an object drawing over something else, and then you move that object drawing again, it doesn't take a bite out of the other pieces. Again, that can be advantageous, but to be perfectly honest, I generally prefer working with shapes rather than object drawings. And if I need them to be a grouped item, or as we'll see later on, a symbol, I can do that myself. Nevertheless, either way which you prefer to work is completely up to you. Now, what if I wanted to change this object drawing's color? Well, you could select it and change its color just as easily as doing that. You could also double-click this item, and let's take a look at what happened here. What is happening is the same thing that happens inside of grouped items when you're working in Adobe Illustrator. What we have here is a grouped item, our object drawing, and when you double click it, you enter into isolation mode. And as you can see here, we are now inside the group. So if I were to select this, if I were to move it around, and now it's acting like a shape, right? I can separate it. It's not grouped as both a fill and a shape. I can actually move that shape around. So if I want to get out of the object drawing, notice everything that's on the stage, not part of the object drawing, is actually faded and a lot more opaque. So it's almost as if we're seeing what's on the stage through the eyes of this container. So to return to the stage, all you have to do is click on scene 1 or double click to get inside, double click on the white to exit. So that's about it. When we come back, we're going to talk about working with strokes and working with some more object drawings, but looking at some different possibilities that we have available to us.